Cows are crossing the railroad tracks. Not exactly a great hook for a story, is it? Not all on its own, at least. But we can infuse it with drama. It all depends on how it connects to the other events around it. You might think of it like this. An event in a story is dramatic when the reader cares about it. Or, in other words, when it has an influence on their emotions. To give the cows emotional weight, we need to connect them to a character that we care about. This time, that character can be named Lucia. She'll be a college student driving home to see her family for winter break. Because the cows are crossing the tracks, a train nearby has to stop across the highway, and Lucia isn't able to get through. Which would only be an inconvenience, right? Maybe you've heard something like this before. Why did the cows cross the train tracks? To get away from the forest fire rapidly encroaching upon them. Lucia wants to get away from that too. She's forced to get out of her car, climb past the stopped train, and run away from the fire on foot. Understandably, she has an emotional reaction to this. She's freaking out. Will she make it to safety? Stay tuned to the end of the video to find out. Anyway, that gives the cows some emotional weight. Because we understand the chain of cause and effect, we can say, if only those cows hadn't crossed the tracks, she wouldn't be in such a tight spot. But as a story, this is still missing some things. For one, Lucia doesn't have a whole lot going on, does she? This situation would put pressure on anyone, so it works, even with a character who's basically a blank slate. But what if we want a little bit of depth? For that, we'll move on to level 2. This time, we'll start with a character. This is Chester. Lucky for Chester, he gets to have a single character trait. He has low self-worth. This trait will inform how Chester responds to the events around him. For example, when Chester's wife gets a promotion and her workload increases, she starts spending nights at the office. Another husband might worry that his wife was overworked, or might get curious about what exactly she's doing. But Chester and his low self-worth have never believed that he's good enough for her, so he immediately assumes that she's cheating on him. Look at that. None of the events leading up to Chester's reaction are all that dramatic on their own. We don't have any strong external sources of pressure like Lucia's forest fire. Instead, the real source of pressure for Chester is internal. As long as he has these insecurities, he's a potentially unlimited well of drama. To draw from that well, we only need to connect events to him in a way that targets his specific insecurities and provokes an emotional reaction. That's all well and good, but something's still missing. Chester is too passive. He responds to his circumstances in an interesting way, but he doesn't do anything to change them. In other words, he has no agency. To fix that, we'll move up to level 3. Agency usually just means that a character is able to drive their own story, that their choices will influence the broader course of events. For our purposes, we'll get a little bit more specific. We will say that agency means a character's choices are important enough for the reader to care about. That means that they have to have an emotional influence on a character that the reader is invested in. To demonstrate that, we'll use Marcia. She works an office job of sorts. Her actions begin with a desire and a belief. She wants respect, and she believes that she'll have to tear others down to get it. So she sabotages a project and pins it on the project manager. He's demoted, and she gets his job. She's riding high for a while, until he does the same thing to her. In the end, their boss has had enough, and they are both fired. In this example, Marcia is on both sides of the equation. She causes a series of events, and also suffers its ultimate effect. A closed loop like this gives Marcia an opportunity to grow. Her belief told her that she needed to bring someone else down in order to rise up, but when she tried that, it didn't work. If she understands that, her belief might change, and next time around, she could make different choices. Or she could double down on her belief, make even worse decisions, and suffer an even worse consequence. In fact, that might be more fun to write. So, this closed loop demonstrates Marcia's agency, but it doesn't give us the whole picture. After all, the consequences of her actions travel through somebody else before reaching her, through the project manager. What would it look like if we modeled his agency too? For level 4, we'll have 2 characters, both undergoing their own cycles of cause and effect, one of which will influence the other. Our first character is Vera. When she was just a child, her father was taken from her by an international cabal of spooky criminals. We'll call them Bad Guys Incorporated, or BGI for short. After she was orphaned, she was taken in by a group that fights against BGI, sort of a spy versus spy kind of thing. We'll call them GGI. She was adopted by GGI's director, John, who became a second father to her. When she reached adulthood, she started to work as one of their agents. Vera is driven by the belief that she has a duty to make sure nobody else ever loses a loved one to the spooky criminals of BGI. Our second character is Thomas. He's a psychologist who has been hired by GGI to analyze and predict their enemies' movements. He has a son, Gabriel, whom he loves very much, but his wife is long gone. He's been romantically involved with Vera for a few years and believes that their connection is too strong to break. Maybe you can guess where this is going. To start off this example, Vera acts on her belief. When a family with 2 young children is targeted by BGI, she takes them into protective custody at GGI headquarters. What she doesn't know is that the family is actually made of spies. Before anyone can stop them, they've gone, and they've taken Director John with them. In his absence, Vera is put in charge. This brings us to a full loop for Vera. She acted from her belief, was punished for it, and is forced to question it. How can she protect others from loss if she can't even protect herself? Vera's reaction is to double down. She is determined to rescue John and to prove to herself that she is strong enough to keep to her belief. In the meantime, Thomas has found out where John was taken. But he also knows that he's being used as bait to lure GGI into an unwinnable fight. He worries that Vera will take that bait, but he tells her the location anyway. Despite Thomas's warning, Vera immediately starts planning a rescue mission. They argue. Thomas says that he'll leave the organization if she doesn't call it off. He has faith in the strength of their connection, so he thinks that this will make her see reason. Instead, Vera has him forcibly detained. She doesn't believe that she can succeed in rescuing John without his help. And when he still refuses to cooperate, she orders her agents to kidnap his son, Gabriel, to use as leverage. Finally, that's enough to change Thomas's belief. He realizes that his connection to Vera isn't as strong as his love for his son, and that Gabriel needs to be his top priority. Let's take a step back for a moment and see what we have here. Both Thomas and Vera have a loop of cause and effect, similar to what we saw in the previous example, but in this case they're intertwined. The change in Vera's belief causes her to take actions that force Thomas's belief about her to change as well. This is a more realistic way to map out a character's agency. One character's choices tend to get mixed up with another's, and the consequences of one person's actions are usually mediated through somebody else. If we take this to the extreme, we can make the consequences of a single choice echo out through an entire story. In fact, why don't we see what that looks like? Back to Thomas. He's got his priorities straight now, and he's looking for a way to prevent his son from being kidnapped. Luckily, the woman who brings him his meals happens to be an underling of the person responsible for coordinating that kidnapping. We've met her already. It's Marcia. Marcia hears from this smart psychologist guy that she can get promoted if she just sabotages her project, the kidnapping of a child, and blames her manager. But it doesn't quite work out the way that Thomas had planned. Marcia does get promoted, and Gabriel stays unkidnapped for a little while longer. But now that she's the manager, she has to do her job. And so she ends up having him kidnapped anyway and loaded onto a train to be delivered to headquarters. When Thomas hears about that, he's far from pleased. But it's hard on Marcia too, being the new project manager. It keeps her really busy, and she barely ever gets home to see her husband. So Chester is worried that she's cheating on him. He searches through her belongings and finds a note with the name of a train and its arrival time. He assumes that that's where she'll be meeting her secret lover. He goes to the station to confront them, but he gets there early. He's stressed, and he starts chain smoking. A stray breeze carries a lit ember from his cigarette to a pile of dry leaves. When Marcia learns about the forest fire, she sends an order for the train to make its delivery as quickly as possible. But the former project manager, who has to deliver that order, doesn't want the train engineer's death on his conscience. He changes the order and tells the engineer to run away if he doesn't think he'll make it in time. And that train might have made it on time, if it weren't for the cows. So the train stops, and the engineer runs away, and Lucia has to climb past it. But while she's doing that, she hears somebody banging on the inside of a boxcar, trying to get out. She runs back to her car for a crowbar and breaks the lock. Lucia's kind of a badass, it turns out. Inside is Thomas's son, Gabriel. He's saved, at least for now. And that is level 5. These 5 levels are just meant to give you some basic shapes, some patterns of causality to play around with. I've barely scratched the surface of what you could do with these tools, so I'd encourage you to try this method of plot mapping out for yourself, see how far you can take it, and find its limits. If you want to have a closer look at the example I cooked up for this video, I've put the entire flowchart into a PDF. You can download it by clicking on the first link in the description. And that's all for this video. If you liked, like. If you want more, subscribe. If you just enjoy clicking buttons, click the bell icon too. With that, we're done.